Northeast, and we saw it sort of California, Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. But now, in hearing Dr. Burks talk yesterday and just literally spending a few minutes looking at the numbers, now it looks like the sort of the wave, if you will, is moving more towards the Midwest and the upper Midwest. They're seeing test positivity going up. They're seeing their case numbers inch up. Not huge movements yet, but it's kind of like what we saw in early to mid-June. And so I think there are certainly lessons that we can learn from the data in terms of what we look at. But in terms of where we find ourselves today, based upon what we're seeing in terms of new cases, and we know that things like hospitalizations, ICU use, ventilator use tend to be lagging indicators because it can take 2 or 3 or 4 weeks that with the cases continue to decline over the next 3 or 4 weeks, all other things being equal, we should start seeing hospital utilization decline a little bit as well. And we've already seen it to a certain extent. If you look at total COVID cases in hospitals across the state, which would be both confirmed and suspected COVID cases, you add those two numbers together, we're down about 10% from the absolute peak a couple of weeks ago. But again, they're more flat than they are declining at this point. Hopefully we'll see that roll over and actually start declining on hospitalizations. But all of that is going to be dependent upon our ability to continue to drive the numbers down. We're not going to continue to drive the numbers down sitting at this table. What's going to drive the numbers down is the people that are watching today and their friends and their neighbors and their kids and their grandkids being smart, wearing a mask, not going into large groups. And so, I think lessons learned, look, I've said repeatedly throughout this that there's going to be plenty of time for Monday morning quarterbacking about a year from now. But right now, let's continue to do what we can to flatten the curve and hopefully roll it over.
And I think to echo a lot of the same points, we need to have the long view. This isn't going anywhere anytime soon. In the summertime, people were ready to throw off the restrictions and go back to normal, or even more than normal in some cases, and we've paid the price for it. We're at a state where we have a mostly functional economy. People are doing some things with some restrictions. It's different than we would like, but we've got to just stick with it for a while until we have an effective vaccine. We're not likely to see the end of this, and so we're going to look into the next year, right? So let's have the long view, be patient, and not minimize the severity of the virus. There's a temptation to minimize it so we don't have to worry about it, and then we end up paying the price for that too.
Speaking of Monday morning quarterbacking, I wanted to ask you about your college football tweet today. You wrote that college football is essential. What do you think opponents of football think kids will end up in a bubble without it? You can get COVID anywhere. Earlier this week and previously as well, you've said that you don't think it's a good idea for thousands and thousands and thousands of people to attend high school football games. How do you reconcile that statement with saying that college football is essential when clearly college football is a much larger draw of audiences, not only for the games, but for tailgating and other socializing?
Right. Well, if you read my entire tweet, the end of it is very clear that the way in which you play college football this year is by limiting crowd size and let the players play. Many of these players have been on college campuses now for months and months. They have been practicing, and when I listen to folks like Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback at Clemson, and other athletes, some even here in Mississippi, talking about their desire to play, you think about the fact that you've got a large number of college athletes that are looking to further their career. And in some instances, you've got college athletes that were it not for college football or some other sport, they may not have even had the opportunity to get a junior college education or get an opportunity to play, to get an education at the collegiate level. And so I personally would believe that we can play college football. I don't think you can do it in a stadium with 100,000 people in it. That certainly doesn't make any sense. But we've been working with our universities, State and Ole Miss and Southern Miss and others, looking at the potential for an agreement on what it would look like. And so, look, there are no easy decisions, I understand at this point, but we're also not going to ever completely minimize risk and mitigate risk to a point of zero. We've got to understand that our goal is not to go from where we were on March the 11th when we had the first case down to 0 cases, because that's not a realistic goal. Our goal has to be to protect the integrity of our healthcare system, which is, if I've said it once, I've said that 500 times from right here, and I believe that we can do that. And I believe that, particularly given the number of testing requirements that have been put upon our universities across this country, that we can play football, certainly not without any risk, but with minimal risk, and we give those kids an opportunity to be in school and also to play.
Jack from Clarion Ledger has a question.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Emily asked. Yeah, in your tweet, you said that college football is essential. What does essential mean to you, and why specifically is college football essential? Why not, other maybe college athletics?
Well, I think that the tweet regarding college football was because there are many different commissioners and across the country that are certainly looking at this question today. There's been a lot of reports over the last several days that up until Friday of last week, there was a significant amount of optimism that we were going to go forward. The Southeastern Conference, for instance, has already announced that they're going to push back the start date until September the 26th, but that they plan to have a 10-game all-conference schedule. And so for some of these other conferences now to be backing up and deciding that they're not going to, I just don't believe is the right decision. When I talk about things that are important to society, is we have got to find a way to move through the next 3 or 4 months or 5 months or however long it is until a vaccine is found, to operate in a way that is smart, but that also affords us the opportunity to live our life. The question was asked earlier about lessons learned. When we were sitting here in March and April, everyone was talking about when are we going to completely shut down our economy? When are we going to completely shut down our economy? And in our state, we were very reluctant to do that. And in fact, we only had a shelter-in-place order for a little over 2 weeks. And because of that, because we kept our economy going, we find ourselves today, as I mentioned yesterday, in which our economic recovery in terms of jobs lost in February to April that have returned in May and June is the 7th best in the entire nation. It's because we recognize that there are risks, but there are also actions that we can take to mitigate risk and still continue to live our lives. I believe the same can be said for college football. I think there are many kids, and by the way, it's not limited just to college football. There are many kids in high school that the athletic portion of their day is extremely important to them. And so I believe that there is a way for us to do high school sports in a safe, responsible way. That's not going to include tens of thousands of people in the stands, because we know that that's an opportunity for a super spreader event. But there is a way for us to have sporting events that are safe, and I think that that's where the conversation should be around college football, not an effort to shut it down.
Yes, as far as the economic impacts this might have on college football, college football is a big sport here in Mississippi, brings in a lot of money, and those specific programs are used to operating on budgets where they can travel, they can go places they don't have to worry too much about because they bring in so much. Are you concerned about, if we limit crowd sizes, those programs not having the same kind of funding? And then also, are you concerned about, if one person gets coronavirus, you might have 15 people out on the team on any given week?
Yeah, I will tell you, I am concerned about the financial impacts. I'm also concerned about the financial impacts to all of the other sports, because particularly at the larger universities, there is no doubt that football helps fund not only scholarships but the annual operating budgets of virtually every other sport. I saw a stat the other day in which somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 20 total athletic programs in all of America are actually cash flow positive that are not college football. And that just shows you that if you really care about women's track and field or men's soccer or diving at some universities or the other sports, it requires significant funding typically from college football. And so there's an awful lot of kids that are on our college campuses right now that play sports, that are getting full scholarships, that depend on some funding. There's no question that if we start college football in September, and let's just say we're at 10% or 20% or 30% capacity, they are not going to generate the kind of revenue that they could generate if they were at 100% capacity. But I would submit to you that given the TV revenue and given the reality of 25 or 30% capacity, generating that kind of revenue they will have revenue losses relative to what they did last year, but they will generate money to the point that they can help fund other programs, which I believe is critically important to an awful lot of student athletes across the state of Mississippi, which I am obviously most concerned about, but it's also true of a lot of student athletes across America.
Dave Elliott with WLOX has a question.
Thank you, Renee. I hope you don't mind. I'd like to request a second question with Dr. Dobbs, if I may. Governor, we talked about the Department of Marine Resources budget yesterday. Well, lo and behold, lawmakers left the Capitol without passing that DMR budget. Problem continues to be in the House. Control over millions of dollars in Go Mesa money. You can call a special session and put DMR on the call. Will you? If so, when will you do that? And what can you do today to keep DMR functioning?
Well, thank you for that question, Dave. You are, as is often the case, exactly right. The problem continues to be in the House, and it continues to be about the power of naming specific certain projects. They are very, very interested in their ability to do that. The Senate is not interested in that, and I think correctly so. I appreciate the senators holding their ground and focusing on doing what's best for the coast. You're right. I do have the opportunity to call a special session. We are currently in conversations about if it is time for us to do that, and if so, when that may be. No final decision has been made at this time, but I am very, quite frankly, I'm forced to look at that option. I felt certain that the leadership in the House would recognize that we had funded DMR over the last 15 years in a certain way, and they certainly have the right to change that, but to do so, they got to get the votes to do it. And I felt like when they recognized that after their first attempt in late June did not work, that they would come in and in good faith pass the agency's budget, and then we could fight over something else in the future. But that's not the path that they chose to do. This is uncharted territory. I've been around 17 years, and even when Billy McCoy was Speaker and Haley Barbour was Governor, we didn't find ourselves in mid to late August with a state agency that wasn't funded. I'll tell you, Dave, my heart breaks for the 150 plus personnel that work at the Department of Marine Resources. They don't deserve to be put through this fight. They don't know necessarily where their next paycheck's going to come from. Some of them got furloughed on July the 1st. We need to put people before politics, and unfortunately, that hasn't happened. Sir?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Governor. Dr. Dobbs, quickly, you talked about students and districts and positive tests. Down here on the coast today, Gulfport High School, a staff member exhibiting symptoms. This was in the choir. 100 students now in 14-day quarantine. Elementary school in Ocean Springs, staff member with symptoms actually testing positive. 13 students now in a 14-day quarantine, consistent with protocols at both schools. Are you satisfied with that kind of protocol in that situation? And are you concerned that this is just going to keep happening every day, one school after another?
It's going to keep happening to some degree. I would say that it's a bit of a disappointment to have to quarantine that many people. Under the current guidance, if you can maintain the proper spacing of 6 feet and more per student, then there is not a mandated quarantine. And so to me that suggests that our classes are too crowded. Just to be quite honest, we haven't done a successful job in sort of blending different schedules and then online learning sort of combinations. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see this. It's just inevitable until we can get our community transmission down considerably. This is information that we hadn't received yet. It's not been reported to us yet, and that's going to happen because the Facebook reporting mechanism is the fastest there is nowadays. But we'll continue to monitor these things. But the choir worries me a lot, right? We know singing is a great way to transmit coronavirus. These are things that we've talked about. These are vulnerabilities. And we may have to really try to reinforce with the school districts to try to take those next steps. Everybody's so anxious to get back to normal. I would actually say, why don't we sort of go baby steps before we do some of these things? I understand people miss school, but we're going to have to be really conscientious about the simple things, and improved spacing is going to be one of those big components.
I would just follow up by saying I am definitely concerned about the number of cases, and I'm definitely concerned about the quarantine of students. But I will tell you that I would be more concerned if there were no quarantines and there were no cases, because I would be concerned that the schools were not doing what they needed to do to identify the cases and then quarantining the students and slowing down the spread of the virus. And so we know that there are going to be cases. We are seeing less community transmission. That's a positive. That's a very good thing as we go into the next couple of weeks. Hopefully that trend will continue. But I do, to answer Dave's question, I do anticipate and believe that we are going to have cases in our schools, just like we would have kids test positive and adults test positive if we were not in school. The fact is there is community transmission, and there are some individuals that are contracting the virus. Bobby.
Governor, just following up on the marine resources issue again, how long are you going to keep on keeping the agency going, and how long can you, I know you said it's uncharted territory, and then also just following up on any additional thoughts on the session yesterday and the veto and just those two issues?
Yeah, no, I think I will tell you that I am surprised that they did not fund the Department of Marine Resources budget. I felt like that was one of the primary reasons that they were coming in. It's the reason they called themselves in and paid themselves a per diem and other things. So I'm surprised that they decided to leave without doing that. But again, we are left with making a decision because they didn't fund a state agency that has been funded in a certain way for 15 years. I can't answer today exactly what that looks like, but we are certainly having conversation, and that includes with our legal staff, with the Finance Administration legal staff, with the Department of Marine Resources legal staff, and trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. What obligation do we have at this point? And can we continue to keep the agency open? So what was your other question? I'm sorry.
Any final thoughts on the session as a whole yesterday and the vetoes?
Well, I thought the outcome of yesterday was excellent. I vetoed the K through 12 education bill because they did not fund the school recognition program. That is a program where 23,157 teachers were entitled to nearly $30 million in compensation that they had earned. And so I was extremely pleased that the legislature agreed with my position that they needed to fund that $30 million. Now, I'll point out, and I think it's important, we saw a lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate say that they had always intended to fund the program. And if that's true, then hopefully we won't have to have this debate and this conversation next year, that they'll go ahead and fund it when they pass the appropriation bill. And so I'm excited about that. I think it's really a good thing that we were able to get that $30 million for those 23,157 teachers, and I'm real excited about that.
Hunter Dawkins with the Gazebo Gazette has a question.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Governor. Governor, the question for you is, and I'm not trying to be repetitive from yesterday, but as far as it goes with a bunch of the athletic coaches that I've talked with from different sports have mentioned to me, what is the deal? Are we have a timeline, or we have a size capacity level, whatever it takes place with that. And I know that you had a conversation, at least a few, I'm sure, with the MHSAA directors, and where are we going from here, and how are we going to move forward?
Yeah, those conversations are ongoing. I had multiple conversations earlier today regarding that. As it currently exists under the existing executive orders, they can have a capacity of no more than 25% in an outdoor venue. We are having conversations as to whether or not we should limit that further. We had conversations with Dr. Dobbs late last week. We've had conversations with various interested parties over the last several days, and we're not ready to announce anything today, but we certainly would expect to do so in the very near future.
Jackie with WHBQ has a question. She's not unmuting. Dave with WLOX has another question.
Okay, here we go. Governor, yesterday you talked extensively about unemployment benefits. There was some confusion over the president's executive order. White House Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow kind of cleared it up, I think, today. Mississippi pays $235 a week. The state will add $100 out of its own pocket, and then the Fed will contribute $300. Is that how you see it? And is that a budget buster for the state's trust fund?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are certainly looking into that topic as well. The president signed the executive order over the weekend. I want to thank the president for taking action. The reality is that the Democrats have a $3.4 trillion plan that is completely devoid of reality. They're asking for $950 billion for state and local governments, which is an astronomical number that is not at all realistic. With respect to the $100, my estimation is that additional $100 would cost the trust fund in Mississippi approximately $22 million per week. We currently are spending between $21 and $23 million per week. If we added the $100, that would mean we would have $45 million per week coming out of the trust fund. And we started this process with $706 million. Even after the legislature gave us $181 million, we only have $489 million left in that trust fund. So if we were to add that $100, we could potentially run out of money in the trust fund within approximately 10 weeks. I am very concerned about that. And so we haven't made a final decision yet, but it certainly would present major financial challenges for the trust fund. And keep in mind, it's easy to stand up here and say it would create financial challenges for the trust fund, but at the end of the day, the trust fund is just the mechanism. Who pays for it is the employers and ultimately the employees. And so this is the potential for a significant tax increase on small businesses, and we're going to work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. The legislature is probably going to have to put more money in the trust fund. I think that's going to be critically important in the weeks ahead, and we're going to work with them to make sure that they understand that when Ms. Turner recommended $500 million in CARES Act funds, that was a real number based upon real expectations. And keep in mind, all of this and all these financial challenges are in lieu of the fact, and even because we had one of the 5 most healthy trust funds in America in March, and also we have had the 7th fastest growth in jobs from what we lost in March or April in America, and we're still looking at these financial challenges. So I'm very concerned about it, and we haven't made a final decision yet as to whether or not we're going to jump in.
Governor, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I mean, just keeping on that track for just a second. I mean, I read something. I don't know if anybody knows for sure yet, but that there was a story that I understood that you could take like $100 million out of that 235 you were already paying and count that toward the 100. Have you heard that? Which that would not be an additional drain on the trust
Yeah,
fund.
I have heard that. I have not been able to confirm it in writing yet, and so we're in obviously communications with the administration and trying to get that confirmed to see if that is actually true. You know, the way in which the president did it is through the Stafford Act, and so the question becomes, if there is a state and local match, does the 235 that we're currently paying in weekly contributions, would part of that count for the state's 25% match? And I don't have a definite answer of that. I've heard a lot of people speculate, but I don't have a definite answer on that yet, but I'm looking into it.
What I'm missing on these numbers, if $235 a week costs the state $22 million, how does $100 a week cost the same amount? Like, what am I missing there?
Yeah, so it's the number of people that are eligible for the PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, is different than the number of people who are eligible for normal state benefits. And so, for instance, I'll give an example. If you are working in a restaurant, but you're only working part-time, well, part-time is not necessarily eligible for typical state benefits, but you are eligible for the PUA under the Federal CARES Act. The other thing is not everybody makes $235, so some make $50 a week, et cetera. So, yeah, sure. Yes.
Yes, I want to follow back up on the sports football thing. Some athletic directors are saying they're concerned that there's going to be additional costs as well, just because of protections from coronavirus as they travel. Are you concerned about football players as they travel to other states, as they travel even like within Mississippi for other football games?
Yeah, no, I'm concerned about everything, and there's certainly going to be risk, and there's certainly additional cost. There's no doubt about that. That there's additional testing costs. You know, if you have 120 football players and you're getting a test every week, or in some instances 2 tests every week, there's additional costs there. And so it's certainly easier for those larger institutions to be able to adhere to that than it is others. And so, you know, I think a lot of these are difficult questions. Most of that is actually being handled at the conference level. Where most of our focus has been is on crowd size, because that's more of the real public health issue, in addition to that for the student athletes and the students for that matter.
Alex with Mississippi Today has a question.
Great.
Thanks, Renee. Dr. Dobbs, you talked about the kind of lowering test numbers in recent days, and I'm just curious, and for the sake of having the most accurate new case count as possible, if the state has a target in mind for the number of new tests it likes to see?
You know, not really. In Mississippi, a lot of the demand is driven by illness. We certainly have a goal for the public health lab. We want to really maximize its output such that we're reaching those high impact communities as much as we can. We are very much hoping we can use the Lexington experience from over the weekend to be more aggressive in different communities. So look forward to some exciting things happening on that front. But, you know, we're kind of like most people, or a lot of people in Mississippi don't have a primary care doctor. A lot of people don't get care unless they're sick. So the high testing numbers a lot of times reflects the number of people who are ill and symptomatic. So I wouldn't say that we have some sort of artificial target that we want for testing. The percent positive will reflect that somewhat as well if people are only going in if they're getting sick.